Is so it's Friday. Friday. I'm not really sure. Actually, that does mean a lot to me this week. It really means a lot to me. Usually, in entrepreneurship, um, I don't really get much of a weekend. I chose that life because it was easier for me to regulate my lifestyle, my mental health, because working in this field, I was already at a deficit coming into the field. With we all carry our shit, our trauma, baggage, closets, skeletons, whatever you want to call it. There's a name for it in every various perspective. But my lifestyle, really, in the long term, is so much better. And I have to note that I'm biased when I think it's better for everyone. If we can find a way to have this society restructure itself to give people more of this less all or nothing work schedule, like this 9 to 5 and all the time. But I understand working every single day can be a little bit taxing as well. Um, there's just so much going on right now. And so when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I'll give you all a heads up. It is a little bit lengthy because it does intersect with a couple of topics. And I wrote down some notes so I didn't get too far off with how I want to bring this up to y'all. But I have this what I call kind of like insider trading insight, right? Like Martha Stewart went to jail for this. The only way I would go to jail for this is if I broke HIPAA and told you like, yep, this person at this place at this time told me this, this, and this. And it's not any information that is going to be unequitable for someone to profit off of, right? But you can profit in a way energetically if you consider how to apply the insight that I have. And what that insight is really I talk to so many different types of people every day. And there's some people, whether it's location based or whether it's just the type of experiences that they have. And that's really why I love my job, is because yes, I went and got a master's degree. I went and got all this clinical training that I had to pay for and invest in myself with. But now I'm at this point where I just get to learn from other people. Whether sometimes my clients, we talk about, like, I have a lot of healthcare clients, so I know some really weird, and not weird, but like information about healthcare and holistic practices and Ayurvedic medicine and Western medicine and Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, that I would have to go spend my time at a university understanding, or I spend my time helping people learn the skill that I actually didn't really learn in school. I learned it by working in different environments, which is why, just to kind of point out, perspective counseling is, perspective's my word. I got it tattooed on me, right? Like, for accountability, to remember that you can learn from every situation that you experience. And that's ultimately how I help people. Like, I've got experience in the prison system and forensics, social work, diagnostics, and assessment. But my forte, I'll keep going setting wise. I've done residential inpatient treatment for women and children. So I've got I considered myself like a grandmother, because I was really learning how to parent, but also counsel. And then I had a lot of case management experience. Then I've had inpatient psychiatric experience, outpatient DWI counseling and assessment. What else have I done? I don't know. I've done a lot. Oh, I was a bus driver at one point and I got my CDL. So I've just gathered all these different experiences that likely was because I was an undiagnosed attention deficit, and I already know I was anxious and depressed for most of my life. But all of that really kind of went into me jumping throughout these jobs because I got bored easily, right? And when you get bored easily, the best part about it is that you like to learn. You can learn a lot of different things. But it was not until I started realizing that, working with the majority of the addiction population and watching people have to recover and learning the system of recovery, that I realized I had to stop. I had to be like, skirt. Let me slow down here, right? Like if you were driving on a road and you realize like, yo, I think I'm supposed to be here. But if you ever have that feeling like, yeah, I'm not, I missed my turn, right? First of all, don't skirt in the middle of the road. Don't just stop. But you're not going to keep going in the direction that you're going without looking for another way to either turn around or go in a different direction that is more in the direction that you were supposed to be going. And I apologize about my camera. I updated my freaking computer, and none of my drivers are really digging this. Anyways, point being, it wasn't until I stopped, and I was already in my career, mind you. Like I stopped, my stop or my redirection was after it was, well, chronologically, it was in about around 2017. But my stop, I started to slow down once I realized I was about to buy my house. This was in mid 2017. And I closed on my house in December of 2017. And it was that build up, actually, no, maybe it was a little bit early 2018. I'm in the process of writing my story out in my timeline. So, but it was in 2018 where I was like, oh, I've gotten here. I got the house. I'm a homeowner at, 27, I think. I'm a homeowner at 27. I worked my ass off to get here, but I feel so not happy with it. Because I was never really connected to the process. And that's where I started realizing, like, actually the information that I knew in my profession, I wasn't applying it. I wasn't practicing what I preach. So the last 5 years have been me practicing what I preach as a therapist, as a student of other people. And that's why I really, today, after leading up to that for 7 minutes, I want to talk to you about what it's like to be a therapist. Everyone has their own different journey, but my goal of coming out and putting myself out there is how people who, whether you look like me, if you don't look like me, that you can find some degree of relatability in my story and have a tangible, action from, okay, well, what do you do and how do you apply that in your own life? And so a lot of what I wanted to talk about today, sorry, I almost kicked over my light, is I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned it in previous lives, but this our relationship with time. And I'm 33 years old. So that is like my indicator, right? Like, okay, I'm a third of into my life. And I was probably a quarter. Like if you consider, average life expectancy for a female, but a female at my weight and at my health status is not 100 years old. I was like pushing like maybe 70 tops, like because men my size were like, your average life expectancy was like 65, right? So my health change was really about giving myself more time. But the catalyst to it was my relationship with money. I was actually trying to save money. And so, but I was looking at like, I'm 20, 25, 26, right? Maisie, come here. Come on, because you always have the best timing. So I was 25 and I was like, all right, I've been this way my whole life. I have this degree of urgency that I can't explain other than calling it anxiety. And that's what I want people to understand, and I'm trying to stay on focus here, but is that our relationship with time is the diagnosis in a lot of ways. It is the amount of time that we have suffered. The diagnosis is the amount of time that we have suffered and produced consequences that impact our life and what they look like in our life. And so I'm not going to talk about the diagnoses today because I want to be a little bit more structured with that particular conversation, to be honest with you. If you scroll across this on Facebook, I might not interest you. But if you really do want that information, that's part of my program that I will be launching live soon. I keep talking about it, but things keep getting pushed back. And So if I wrap this back around to my relationship with time, I've caused myself in the last 6 months more angst and anxiety and negativity, whatever I've really tried to like be transparent in expressing it, but also not like sending negativity out into the world, right? But it stemmed from my perception of time. And why is this such an important thing? Well, because most people who've now ventured, we're going into this culture where the pendulum's swinging back to what would you say, like a more open, less stigmatized culture about mental health. But I want people to be careful about that, is because when you attach to that identity of like, oh, I'm neurotypical, I'm autistic, or I have autism, I really try not, person first language is what you're going to learn in therapy. And that diagnosis is not just mental health. The diagnosis is the first, I want to say it's the first step. Sorry, my clinical brain kicked in. It is like the third step in the process of treatment, but like treatment and therapy is like for you to come back away from that diagnosis. Not saying that it will not exist anymore. Like if you have a disease or more medical based disease, like if I was going to say cancer, but it's the same thing as cancer, right? Like you go through treatment, you don't have cancer anymore. You just pay attention to how, and it can come back. Your lifestyle has to change. Your treatment progresses, right? So when people go to get mental health diagnoses, attention deficit disorder is at an all-time high right now. And it's because people are paying attention to the consequences that COVID has had, but then also long-term exposure to trauma and other people's trauma. So I really wanted to talk about, and like, what does trauma do? Trauma either freezes you or it speeds you up in life. And there's two other stress. I'm not talking about the stress responses, but that in terms of how it looks for people, it either keeps you stuck in the house, avoiding things. You are literally stuck in life, or you are like, let's go, because you're avoiding it and it speeds you up. So your relationship with time, this is where mania comes in. This is where your schizophrenia and more severe diagnosis come in, is because your brain is processing this information at such a high speed that reality is not going to keep up. You're never going to feel comfortable within your own, because you can't get away from that concept of how you're perceiving time. So time is not just the thing on the clock. It's not the indicator of how societally has constructed what time means to certain places. If you go to Europe, their sense of time is very different from a cultural standpoint than ours in America is. And that's just the clock. Like I keep my phone, not that I can't really prove it to you right now because it's 10:15. But I keep my phone on universal military time because it reminds me that, Maisie, what's up? You want to participate in this conversation? Because if not, you got to translate your own language, or I can translate it for you. She's trying to tell y'all that I'm right. No, I was kidding. She's trying to tell y'all that our perception, it's time for her to be heard. And it's time for y'all to understand how your perception of time is working for you. Now, here's the thing about therapy, and what I wanted to kind of present to y'all today is like, gives you just a glimpse of what it's like to be a part of someone's healing process. Like, what is it like to be a therapist? Because when you go to therapy, now, anyone, you all can correct me, but I'm living my life according to how it makes sense to me and how I've seen it help people. But when you come to therapy with me, you're not supposed to be there forever. You're supposed to get what you need. Maisie, come here. Like it's overstimulating. You're supposed to get what you need, and you're supposed to be able to figure out how to apply it and how to work for you. So if you were to go to physical therapy, right, you're not wanting to be in physical therapy for the rest of your life. If you broke your ankle, you're needing to get back in a certain treatment plan to address how it is that you need to move your ankle, build up the ligaments, and give yourself time to recover, and to slowly and gradually get back to a place where you can put weight on your ankle. Same thing with your brain. it is no different. No therapy is different. The biggest difference that mental health has taken is because it's stigmatized, because it makes you feel less than. It makes you feel like the identity that you hold is wrong. And so, one of my first points that I want to make about what is it like to be and go to therapy, but also like be the therapist with someone who's coming to therapy, right? Is we have to look at the long game. This is an investment in your health, but it's also an investment in your life and in your trajectory and what it is that you want. So I'm always looking at sustainable approaches. I'm always looking for how do you not cause yourself a degree of discomfort that is actually regressive, because it's going to take longer to heal. It's going to bring up more stuff. It's going to bring like stuff that you're not necessarily coping already. You don't know how to cope with already. That's why, therapy is a good option. And that's also why if you feel good, it's probably the best time to go to therapy, because you don't have any active problems that are going to delay, given that is kind of a subjective term of time, the course of how your treatment goes. So I was talking with a couple of my clients. This was kind of a running theme in my sessions this week of like the long game, sustainability. And it was in different contexts of their life, but I really try to take out the underlying message for y'all. And I put it in this, I describe it as like the metaphorical seesaw of like, it comes down to urgency versus sustainability. So if you're passionate about something, whether that be passionate about healing, or I saw this a lot with the Black Lives Matter movement with when George Floyd was murdered, is that we were in a position of like, how do I show up? How do I show that I'm in alliance with this and I'm an ally, or that I want change, that I stand for change without going to the protests? Because there are some people who really couldn't risk that being the one outlet that they had. And so that caused, on the back end, you had some people who were immensely guilty, and that's unproductive. You had some people who were just in guilt. That ultimately it disperses in different ways. So we fall back to have like multiple reactions of like, for some people that speeds them up, that makes them more anxious because they're self-criticizing about like, I'm not there, that means that I'm not showing up, or they implode. Well, I guess no, that was more implosion, or they explode. So they start doing things to avoid the reaction that they're having, right? So what's the problem with this, right? Like, you can always find different outlets. Yeah, but that is your stress response. If you don't know that that's happening and you don't address that reaction, then you start putting that energy in different places that creates consequences in your own life. So this was during COVID, right? So I was seeing a lot of different people have the same reaction. You saw a lot of people's binge eating increase. So therefore it's weight gain. Now it becomes another health issue that they had already been working on. Then you also had conflict in the workplace. And so that's like, we're such an interconnected system that one person's problem with how to emotionally regulate becomes all of our problems in some way, shape, or form. Hope y'all are following me. I think I don't know how many followers. I forgot to start going live on Instagram, so we're just gonna have to share this on Instagram. But so when you're looking at that relationship with time, what are your indicators? Like, so if you think about it like you're driving in a car, what tells you how fast you're going? This was, for some reason, one of my least favorite word problems and math problems when I was in school, is like, how many miles per hour, or how long is it going to take going this amount of time to get to somewhere you're going? But one of your indicators is your odometer. Sorry, I was like, what's the word? Your odometer. So it's like, that tells you how fast you're going. So in a behavioral standpoint, one of your indicators, what are your odometers? What tells you how fast you're going? The more covert one is going to be how fast you're thinking. But in an overt way, watch how fast you're moving. Are you slamming things? Are you more irritable with people? Are you literally driving faster. I saw this a lot with the COVID shutdown as well, is that because there were no cars on the road, people started driving faster. Now that there's more cars on the road, we have an increased rate of accidents. You see people bobbing and weaving a lot more. I know I've been guilty of it, is that because we're not as aware of what degree of stress that we've increased to, our relationship with time, everything feels like it's going by so fast. We are building a reality for ourselves, and everyone's looks different. We're building a reality for ourselves that's based off of how everyone else is moving because we're exposed to them, that they're having the same increased urgency in their relationship with time as we are. So now it's a double whammy. So now it's something that you have to perceive, is this mine or is it theirs? Okay, so this is a really common, so that's the context of like how you can see your relationship with time. If you're saying things like, oh my gosh, the days are going by so fast, that should be an indicator of like, I need to slow myself down. I need to bring myself back down from this internal sense of urgency, because the only thing that's making you move that fast, now, unless someone's literally pushing you along in a line of something, but the only thing that's moving you that fast is your brain and your legs, technically. So I want to bring up the first point of like, what, as a therapist, what do I do about this? Because the goal of therapy, like I said before, is that you don't be in therapy forever. So what do I do as a therapist that helps people with this? Because sometimes, if you haven't noticed, everything I'm talking about is really freaking hard to do on your own. That's why therapists exist. That's job security, right? I don't necessarily want job security, but the reality is that I'm going to have it given the degree of our society right now, because people need to learn how to cope. We need to learn how to cope because other people are not going to learn how to cope. And so the first thing I want to make a point of, and there are 3 P's. I like symmetry. Once I learned how my brain operated, I was like, yo, I'm going to nerd the frig out on this, and everything's going to make sense, and hopefully it makes sense to y'all. The first thing is patience. Okay? If you're going for sustainability, the concept of patience is the first thing that is really, it's a skill. Patience has to be a practice skill. And how I practice that, so at the beginning of my career, I didn't. And I became, I don't know, I can't speak for the perception of my clients of what, but for my friends, I know I became, I left whatever patience I had with my clients, and I didn't have anything left for my personal life. So I think my patience was just, I wasn't intentionally practicing it as a skill. So that was like the first 5 years of my relationship, my professional relationship. Once I started realizing that, I was like, okay, I'm doing this with my patients, but I can't do this with my friends. I can't do this with my family. I had to start practicing it. So a lot of that was in my health journey of like how I'm going to try to lay out, the main principles of transformation, because once you get your mental health under control, everything else kind of, it's like dominoes. It's like everything just, stop. Okay. Everything just falls into place because you've learned to regulate the center, the source energy of the mortal worlds, right? You've got your spirituality, which is a whole other topic that aids with that. And you can be spiritual at the beginning of your journey, which is actually an asset for the process, but you also have to learn the mind and the body part and also the real world systems. So you actually know, and you won't fall prey to a codependent situation, and you just keep, how I describe this whole game of life is like a game of chutes and ladders. The game of life literally does make sense for the analogy of how you learn mind, body, spirit. But what it leaves out is the coping skills. What it leaves out is the visual of what it's like and what you do when you get sent back to the beginning, when you lose things. That's the biggest one, in my opinion, is like how you deal with loss, whether that be good loss or shitty loss, whether it's in your terms or not in your terms. It still has an effect. And I don't remember, and maybe I need to go back and play the game of life again, but I don't remember them really helping y'all with that, playing the game of life. But Chutes and Ladders, most people probably didn't play it because it's like, oh, I got sent back to the beginning. But it gives you a very light perception of like, yeah, it's sometimes it's chance. Sometimes it's smart. Like you need to know human behavior, not from the game standpoint, but from life. You need to know how to navigate so you don't get sent back to the beginning. But also you don't believe that getting sent back to the beginning is the literal beginning, because it's not. You have so much more insight, and you need to go down a couple of chutes so you can figure out where your ladders are. You need to know the difference. Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent. So, building patience as a skill. So this is something where mindfulness as an application can come in. So for me, a lot of it was breathing, because I have had this ability to like learn from people and just observe for the most of my life. I have an older brother, and bless his heart, he got in more trouble first. So I learned very quickly how to avoid trouble. Turns out that wasn't really like a good thing, because I learned to avoid very easily, where he's the type of person, he's like, let's just get to it. Like he's a soldier. He can do that. I just bite into a problem and take it. Whereas I get overwhelmed by it because I avoided that. So my ability to have patience with myself severely suffered. And that carried into the years of, to this day, like I was like, all right, what am I going to talk about? I got to get this together. I haven't written. I'm like, Sarah, you're not being patient with yourself. I was literally like keyed up to the point where I was creating my own chaos. I was the problem. And I wasn't practicing that patience. And it finally came to me probably 2 minutes before I signed on to this live, that it came down to those 3 P's. I need to give y'all, I had the thought process, but I had to give y'all like, okay, what are the points here? And I still want to make this fairly short, because that's just a challenge that I have for myself. And that's also how you build patience, is that you test yourself. Because if you don't test yourself, someone else gonna freaking test you. I promise you that. Someone is going to test you. So you might as well do it yourself, so it doesn't come to your door and surprise the heck out of you. Okay. So that's my first like tangible thing. Practice patience. See patience as something to practice and not just a virtue that you're given. It's the same concept with empathy as well. Empathy, I personally and professionally believe that empathy is an innate virtue that everyone receives as a human being. But our experiences and exposure to stress in a nurturing environment, or lack of a nurturing environment, is what creates a barrier or restriction on that skill of empathy to develop. And that's where therapy comes in hand, right? So using empathy as a coping skill is how I introduce it to people. So patience as a skill, you can develop that. That's why this is an educational experience. Therapy is an education of self, because everyone has the same, similar sets of traits and skills that you can develop. You just have to figure out what type of person that you want to be. You want to figure out your values. You want to figure out how do you want to be perceived. You want to figure those things out, so then that way you know which skill set you need to focus on. So the next point is personalization. I don't take things personally. It's one of the most common things I hear a lot of people say, and it is a form of denial. I said it. We are in constant states of denial until we admit that we have no control over anything and that we don't know everything, and we will never know everything. When we personalize things, I see that as first of all, it's a skill, and it involves learning what boundaries are, which I'm going to try to stay focused and not go into a boundaries conversation, because that is multiple conversations and they're very subjective to each person. So that's where I am advocating for therapy, but I'm also advocating for you to do that work as well, because it's very realistic. I did it on my own. I did it a lot on my own, but it's about taking all of your experiences and personalizing them. So it's actually the opposite. My argument here is that you take things personally, because when you do that, you're able to build that discernment, that trust in yourself to know, I'm going to stay true to the information that serves me, to the things that make me feel like I have a control on who I want to be, but I've also accepted that other people see me this way. So therefore, I have the choice, based off of what I know, what type of person I want to be. I have the choice to be intentional at that point. And that's where a lot of people, when I make the argument, you're not being intentional. You can argue the fact that you've intentionally accepted the consequences, the impact, and the intent that you had for your decision that you're making, then you have a pretty sound, secure mindset. And yeah, you're just different, and that'll be okay. Some people just not going to get you. But if you do not personalize things, you are living in a state of denial. If you do not allow someone's perception of you, and this is where it contradicts the be like, you don't have to work. Actually, it doesn't contradict. You don't have to worry about other people's perceptions of you. I'm arguing that you accept them in, so therefore you can filter out what you don't want and you can keep what you do. That is ultimately how I've gotten to this point, because I've had to work with a lot of different types of people that if I did not consider what they said, I would be the therapist that would be forcing them to be someone that they are not. So if I didn't take personally the criticism of like, Sarah, that's just not helpful. Sarah, like, you insulted me, or no one's ever said that. I have been fired a couple of times because I've not told someone what they wanted to hear. But I also, if I did tell them what I wanted to hear, I wouldn't be staying true to myself. And it was mostly in the form of diagnostics. So if you go back and you rewatch this live, I said before that diagnostics are the first part of the treatment process. They're not actually treatment. They're an assessment. This is saying, hey, you're here. And if you're at the mall and you're at the entrance and you need to go over here, you're not where you need to be. So a diagnosis is not treatment. You cannot just stop there without misaligning yourself from your purpose. So personalization comes when you actually take in, like, okay, I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. What does that mean for me? What does it look like? So we go through, in treatment, we go through what has influenced that. We go through what are the things that continue to reinforce those things happening. And then we figure out, okay, what is it that you need to work on? What is it that you need to start practicing differently to be able to get a different result? And that's recovery. So personalization as a therapist, what is it like? Oh my gosh, I used to take things so personally in the way that I was denying personalization. I'd be like, it's not me. It's not me. It wasn't all me. It was not all my fault. It was not all on me. But I was in that room. I was living and breathing and existing in that room where someone was uncomfortable. Someone was sad. Someone was da da da. And until I was like accepting of that, that's when I realized, oh, I'm absorbing all of that energy. I am taking and being exposed. This is what we call vicarious trauma. And it happens every time y'all leave the house, just so you know, is that when you do not take things personally in some way, you deny yourself from realizing that people's energy got stuck on you. I call it flubber. This is where I use a lot of movie references for visualizations in therapy, is that flubber literally sticks to it and absorbs what it is its host is producing. And it can, I think if my memory serves me correctly, flubber, it like actually adopts the traits and the qualities over time of its host. So therefore it becomes, I think it's like in a lot of ways. Maybe I'm just I could be making this up, but it is like a very premature prototype of AI. Just saying. But point being, if you don't take it personally, you will not be able to really pull the information that is needed out of that experience to be able to help you transform your life. One of my favorite sayings, I don't think I'll fully break myself from it because I love it so much, is, does that make sense? Like, anyone tracking with me? Because no one else is here in this live right now, and I'm just talking to myself, but maybe later on, y'all indicate, you listen to this. Hopefully you can make it 35 minutes, and just tell me if that makes sense, right? Like, if you do not let that in, then you lock yourself into a reaction because you're denying yourself even like a part of that situation, the fact that they pissed you off. And thanks, Mario, I appreciate that. You lock yourself into a reaction, you lock yourself into inflammation. So this is where all the other perspectives of health start to interact. So you get angry, your first disruption is going to be in the gut. Cortisol is produced in the gut, and then therefore your serotonin is also produced in the gut as well. So there's your serotonin dysregulation. So from a hormonal neurotransmitter balance, we're now a little fucked up, just a little bit. I'm always in a state of like a little bit fucked upness, so I'm cool with it. I know it's happening, but my lifestyle is now based off of how do I decrease stress. I'm intentionally putting myself under some stress these days because I am scaling myself. So growth is going to come with stress, but I also have learned to compensate that in different ways within the foods that I eat, the movement that I have, and the practices that I have. So but those are all now becoming barriers to change. So if I'm bringing this back to how do you align with transformation, you kind of like, if you do not understand from the starting point of like what stress, what inflammation, what denial really just does to your body from a neurological standpoint, you're not going to be able to get into a sustainable pattern of change. You're not going to be able to be consistent in a recovery pattern. So that's why my argument is take things personally, because when you do, you fully acknowledge the reality that you live in, that you have no control over it, and your focus now goes to the things that you do have control over. And you can build those skills. So, third P. Now, this is the first time that I have released this. This was my little kind of creative outlet over the last 6 months when I was, I caused myself some stress. I got into, anyways, I'm not going to go on the story. But I created this model of change. Like, what are the main values of change? And it is based off of, or it's influenced by, there's two things. One is the concept of peace. So I call it the peace model. And this is part of my program and what I'm trying to do. And so I would love some feedback for whoever is here. But it is also influenced by something that I'm trained in is called the transanalytical stages of change. Transanalytical stages of change. You can Google it. It's pretty consistently helpful. I'll tell this story very soon, very, very soon. So the stages of change are ultimately the different stages that we go through in creating change. So we've got pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. So this is really taught mostly in the recovery, like a substance use addiction recovery perspective, but it is applicable across the board. So if you look at it from a project management standpoint, I've seen it in like Six Sigma curriculums. It's broken down very differently, but it fundamentally comes down to you have to indicate to yourself where you fall and how your decisions and your actions fall into this process of change. Maintenance is a whole stage of change in itself. Like all of these have very intricate processes. And if I circle this back around, patience is the biggest barrier to actually being able to live in the stages of change. But I've just found that it is a very helpful model because like my brain can complicate things very, very easily. So it's like when we're going through things, I need a simplified presentation for myself. And the stages of change was that for me in the first part of my life. Now, in this part of my life where I'm like, okay, I'm building my business, I'm building who I am and what works for Sara, because what has worked for me has worked for other people. But I also want to see if it can work even better. So I've developed this piece model. I don't have a visual for y'all right now, at least for this live, but I'm going to tell you all the components. There are 5 steps, same processes. The first one is perspective. Go figure. So if you consider these each steps, like pre-contemplation is going to be you more really just thinking about change. What is it that you want? What is it that you want to obtain? It's not even really goal setting, because that would be more in the preparation phase. Contemplating is where you're just building a momentum, right? Sorry, this isn't the old model, but preparation becomes where you're actually starting to put minor actions towards the things. You're not even really at the gym yet. You're just thinking about like, okay, maybe what trainer could I have? Mario, you know my mind because I'm just thinking about physical aspects. So Mario is a really good trainer in the Nightdale area if you need one. So you're starting to take an inventory of like, what do you need to make sure that you can get to this change? And then action is where you actually put, foot forward and effort there. But that's also, it's got some different, levels to it. So back to my model. I got stuck on that. I just wanted to explain each step. But peace, so perspective is the first thing, is when you're looking at how do you sustain change. If you have, let's look at and it's mostly for about how you emotionally regulate. That's probably the biggest change that people struggle with, is because we do not know how to be consistently uninflamed. You're never going to get rid of your emotions. You cannot vomit them out. You cannot extract them from your reality. You have to learn to live with them. You have to coexist with them. So in order to live in a peaceful state, get perspective from your original point of view. Whatever your point of view is right now, unless you've already done and gotten that perspective, do it again. Always try to figure out another point of view from where you're initially believing right then and there. I'm not saying don't trust yourself. I'm just saying look for other perspectives. Is there something that someone else would be able to see about me right now? We do this, and you can use it a lot of different ways. I caution people to do this with humans because other humans are biased. They're not, and I can include myself as well. Even as a therapist, I'm trained to be unbiased. I'm also still a human. I could be unbiased, but when you do this unexpectedly for your family and friends, they're definitely going to be biased because they care about you. They also could be very selfish, and they may not have enough experience to be able to give you the perspective of what's actually going on. Now, one of the ways that I gained perspective in my journey was my horoscope. Now, not all horoscopes created equal, but what it did is that it made me think about what I wasn't thinking about. That's all perspective is. It doesn't have to be like something specific. It just has to take you away from what your own point of view is, because that point of view is likely influenced by an emotional reaction or a trauma reaction that, if you're not going to go to traditional therapy and have like an unbiased third party notice what your patterns are and what you're doing, then you need to get real good at knowing your patterns. And that takes a lot of journaling and a lot of reflection. And it takes a lot of time, honestly. So coming back to the main point of this is that when you do not have a relationship with time that is, you can't control it, but you have to be aware of it, is that you're automatically not going to be aligned with sustainability. You're going to be in urgency. You're going to be saying things quicker. You're going to be insulting yourself faster. You're going to be insulting other people faster. And I've done it. I've been just as, I don't want to say guilty, because I don't guilt myself about it. It's like, I just acknowledge that, I've said some really slick shit before. I can be sarcastic real quick, and that hurts people. That really hurts people. And I'm not the type of person, I'm not in the business of hurting people. I'm in the business of helping people. I'm in the business of healing. So whatever it is that and when I say business, I mean, that's just what my calling is. Like, that's the type of person that I want to be. So if you're not looking at that relationship with time as an indicator, how fast things are going, you're not going to be able to acknowledge perspective in your own life. So that's P. The E stands for educate. So educate yourself on that perspective that you are noticing. So let me go through it. So PEACE, PEACE, stands for perspective, education, acceptance, compassion, and empowerment. So like the stages of change, it is progressive within each other. These are from my standpoint, from watching other people's healing processes, going through my own process. They can be seen as steps. They can also be seen as pillars of just what you can apply in terms of the values of sustainable change. But education is that if you have a new perspective, like say someone says, Sarah, you're being a condescending asshole right now. I need to go ahead and educate myself why they think that. Like, okay, tell me, help me understand what you're saying, right? Because when you educate yourself on that, you're able to discern, like, was that my intent? No, but how could I be coming off that way? It is a lot more work. I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all this is a lot of work, but if you want sustainable change and you want to be more peaceful, less stressed, have better health overall, mental health, this is also what has to happen. Once you get better at it, you get stronger with it. So my goal is to try to reduce the amount of time it takes y'all to be able to do this. But it's up to you to work it. It works if you work it, but you got to work it. So when you educate yourself on that perspective, you start to build yourself into a point where you can take that information and use it for yourself. So where I was saying in my my previous point about personalization, that is education. You get the opportunity to educate yourself on like, hey, is this the type of person that I want to be? Should I consider this information that this person's telling me? You're now not just running your life off of what people think about you. You're actually considering whether or not how you think of yourself. So that's the education example. Acceptance. A for acceptance. So this one, I will say, from my own personal opinion, but it is from watching people, is one of the hardest, more challenging steps of the process. Accepting the things that we cannot change or control. Because once you accept it, and why this was not like awareness or I had a lot of A's to choose from. I had a lot of E's to choose from. So I chose very intentionally. Why the A was acceptance is because we have to constantly accept our current position and place in life in order for us to not become attached to it. And when we accept that we feel a certain way, when we accept we've been treated a certain way, when we've accepted that we've lost a certain thing, we become a little bit more strong in releasing ourselves from that moment. It's when we resist and we deny acceptance of that moment when we become attached to it. So I chose acceptance as a reminder. And when you're looking towards peace, when you're looking towards freeing yourself from contentment and complacency, that acceptance has to be part of the process. And I'd also like symbolically, like if you put this out on, I wish I'd prepared enough to actually have a visual, but like it is the centerpiece. The A is literally the middle letter of peace. And symbolically, you can go either way. You can become imbalanced in one way if you do not. Everything is based off of acceptance. Everything in this life. So if you do not get to this point or you do not understand how to accept the things that you cannot change, then you're never going to get onto the things that you can. So, and I say that pretty confidently, and I don't like to use the word never a lot. It's a little extreme for me. So C for compassion. This as a skill, compassion. Now I know I'm talking about a way of thinking that is new. It's not new, actually. Compassion is not a new concept. But when it comes to leadership, when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to conflict resolution, doing it with compassion is a fairly new thing because we're a society of like stringency and black and white, all or nothing thinking. And doing something with compassion just prompts you to understand the consequences of you making a certain choice. And it also eliminates shame, and it eliminates guilt, and it eliminates as many of the things that really have kept us locked in this really toxic space of what is creating inflammation for people from an individual level, but also society. If you do things with compassion, if you make an effort to understand things, it also reinforces acceptance because you're being compassionate with yourself, and therefore you can become more compassionate with other people, and you get into less conflicts. You also may not have as many friends, I'm just gonna say, but like you are going to reduce the amount of inflammation and reaction within your own body, within your own mind, because compassion is like the fire extinguisher to those really passionate emotions. So sprinkle a little bit of that on your cereal in the morning. And the last step of the model is empowerment. So this is more of an outcome, but it is also, it can be perceived as a skill. It can be perceived as something that you do. I chose empowerment very intentionally again, because there are a lot of E's. I could have gone with empathy. I could have gone with excitement. I could have gone with da-da-da, because it's like, okay, yes, change and peace requires fun. It requires all this. But I really wanted empowerment, I felt like was a more encompassing focal point to find how you can empower yourself, or how do you feel empowered. Remember, these are just points of questioning for yourself, and to walk yourself through the stage of getting through a stressful time, and through getting through a chaotic time. So how can you feel empowered by how things went? You can honestly take the model in itself as a point of empowerment. And the fact that you got to empowerment, you don't really want to rush through it. But if you can find one thing about what you experienced that made you stronger, that made you like, yo, I can see my muscles through my shirt. That's my own personal empowerment moment of like building muscles, of like I literally caused myself pain to get these muscles. It feels empowering. It's also an outcome, and it's also what brings you back to feeling more empowered to take on the next problem that you face. Empowerment, feeling empowered is going to be able to send you out there and either empower someone else or empower yourself to keep going. And you do not have to give, like, I know one of my other lives is like, if you give what it is that you need, it will come back to you. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes you're low, right? But you do not always have to give and empower other people if you are really the one that you need empowerment from, because you need to cultivate your own, what's it called? My brain decides to do this right now. Balance, and I don't mean like balance in a situation, I mean like a bank balance. What is that called? Balance, right? I don't remember. I'm struggling at this point. Backlog, you create your own fund of, and gas in the gas tank of, you got gas, you can keep going, you can give it to other people, and then therefore if you invest a little bit, it comes back to you, from an energetic, emotional standpoint. And if you invest in yourself, that's sustainable. That's sustainable. If you are able to build enough empowerment in yourself, then that's how you're going to be able to conquer sustainable change. That's how you're going to be able to figure out how to, if I'm going back to kind of bring this full circle from what I brought up at the beginning of this live, is, in context, what does sustainable change need to look like? It needs to look like racial equity. It needs to look like financial equity, but just the overall economy. Like it's a lot of stress going on right now. In order for us to endure it, you have to start individually by noticing how to get the inflammation down in your life. It's going to look like, one of my clients this week has a local homeownership issue within their neighborhood that they're trying to deal with, and they're going up against, it's not them, it's someone that they're in the household, that they're like, they're going the passionate route. It's not sustainable. It's not. It's definitely loud and it gets a point across. But when you look at sustainable change, it has to be done over time. One big change. Now, I'm not saying don't stop the fight. I'm saying for these are the people who struggle with showing up in those bigger fights because you're too overwhelmed. This is for the people that struggle with an anxious response versus getting out there and protesting. Some people, we need people to stay out there, but we also need people on the back end to take more care of themselves so you can be in this for the long haul. Racial and diversity and inequity work is not something that's going to change overnight. And that was a lesson I learned watching, the George Floyd protest and Black Lives Matter coming to a head, is that I have to be in this for the long game. That was more of an awakening period for me. But I was like, yo, I can't go out to the protest because I have a fresh business that I got to tend to. I got clients. I'm going to exhaust myself. I'm going to, all these things. I became super anxious. And then I realized, like, oh, I can do something more sustainable. So that's where my perspective circles conversations comes in. And I am thinking about rebooting those soon. It's a planning phase. I'm in more of my contemplation and my preparation phase for those, not quite at my action phase. But because people need those conversations that are regulated and more sustainable than trying to hop into a conversation on Facebook. Or I've done this to myself, as hop into a conversation on Clubhouse and where it is all verbal, because it is so heated that we're actually losing people for the overall cause of that really needs to be talked about because it's so activated, because it's so inflamed. And I'm all about not making people stay comfortable, but I'm all about doing it efficiently and doing it in a way where you're not going to, people are going to tap out and close themselves off and deny the existence of the problem because they're of their own emotional regulation issues. So I'm getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but I hope for those, I had some people tune in today. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have gotten some feedback about the story of all the stories I got to tell. I have a lot of stories I got to tell, but over in time, I will tell those stories. I'm also just making sure that I've learned the lessons that I need to learn before I start telling those stories, because it's important to me to give people tangible insight as well as action steps to take when you're learning lessons that other people have learned. Because if you've not seen or been to some speakers, they're like, yeah, you got to do these things, but they don't ever give you like things to do that actually make sense for your life. They're not realistic for everyone. I try to make sure that, I evaluate the realism about the action steps that I take that can be, they're general enough that you can find them in any particular situation. So those stories will come soon. It's also coming through the form of my book soon, but I'm still in that technically an action stage of that, but it is taking a little bit longer, and I'm being a little bit more thorough with it because I want to. So if you would really like, and I'd really appreciate if you guys go back. I know this is a longer live today, so we're right at about an hour, but I feel like I went over some really, tangible things to consider in your life about what creates chaos, and then also how to diffuse chaos in your life and find peace. Diffuse the chaos, align with peace. You align with peace, you align with transformation. So until next week, y'all have a good weekend. Real quick, if anyone is watching the end of this tomorrow in Wake Forest, North Carolina, I have one of my first and not the last collaborative events for mind, body, spirit activation, Crunch and Brunch, Crunch and Brunch will be at Wake Forest at Fave Nutrition. My girl Carla and my girl Brittany will be doing step and leading a step class. My girl Carla owns Fave Nutrition, so she'll be doing a hydration station, and so we can rehydrate after that good workout. It's supposed to be a beautiful day tomorrow. And then I will be leading a meditation to help you learn the inner workings of how to calm your body down after putting it under that much pressure. But it's overall going to be super fun. And then we're going to eat, because that is exactly my favorite thing to do. So that is tomorrow. Get your tickets. We still have a couple of tickets open left. And they could go pretty quickly, but we are doing scrambled eggs. We're doing protein waffles. We got some shrimp and grits. So if you are in the Wake Forest area, North Carolina, then come check us out. It will not be our last event. It's just our first. So I'm super excited about it. And then also right here, well, that's not my mouse. I'm going to just show y'all here. If you go to my website, right, I have, not only I got my blog posts, that's not the biggest focus point, but my app, we just updated it. I got my app released. I have my resource library there. So if you are starting on your journey to self-discovery, if you've been considering going to therapy, go check out this app, because I'm designing it to try to be like kind of a one-stop shop for what are the main things that you need to take a look at when you're working your journey outside of therapy. Therapy is for those kind of really heavy hitting, narrative rewriting, trauma healing experiences that you need, and you need to have a support system if you don't have that in your natural world. But my app is going to be, and eventually it is is that I have some of my old clients that I still work with therapy, but I'm also opening some new slots that are more therapeutic consulting. So the work that you have to do outside of the therapy to kind of help along the process, so you don't have to it's like going to the gym like once every other week. You ain't gonna get results. Just reality is, you're not going to get these guns going once every other week. I go at least 3 times a week. If you can work it, but honestly, sometimes therapists where that's too much to do in the rooms. So then I'm kind of repositioning myself as a professional to help those and do a little bit more coaching and consulting about how you need to apply those things that you learn in therapy actually in your real world. So go check out the app. And then also my sleep challenge is there, and that's really just to help you guys get into a nice sleep routine. I've kind of curated this cool little sleep hygiene routine that hits the weak points of stress, and it helps you shut down. I call it my Control-Alt-Delete of the central nervous system, shut down and improve your quality of sleep, so that way you don't need as much quantity. So anyways, that is the end of this live. I look forward to hearing any comments, feedback. What do you want me to expand on for next week? Because that would really help. I have a lot of things I can talk about, but it's almost like really hard to choose sometimes. So if y'all want to hear anything specific on these lives, and then that way I know what to prepare for, I'm open to it, and I look forward to seeing y'all. Have a good week.